Someone who attracts toxic relationships meets someone new and feels an immediate, intense connection. There's chemistry. There's excitement. There's a sense of finally being understood in ways no one else has understood them before. And they don't notice, not at first, that this feeling is familiar, that this intensity is a pattern, that the person standing in front of them carries the same emotional signature as everyone who came before. The same unavailability, the same need to control, the same capacity to hurt while claiming to love. And if you've ever been that person, if you've ever looked back at your relationship history and seen the same story playing out with different faces, then, this isn't bad luck. This isn't coincidence. This is something deeper. This is your psychology, recognizing something familiar and calling it home, even when home was never safe. People who attract toxic relationships carry a particular kind of confusion. They don't understand why this keeps happening. They're smart, they're aware, they've been hurt before, they've promised themselves they'd choose differently next time, and yet, here they are again, in a relationship that feels eerily similar to the last one, with someone who triggers the same anxiety, demands the same sacrifices, creates the same instability, and the confusion is compounded by shame, by the judgment, both internal and external, that asks why they keep choosing this, why they can't seem to learn, why they're drawn to people who hurt them, as if it were a conscious choice, as if attraction operated on logic rather than psychological patterning formed long before they had words for what was happening to them. Someone asks, "Why do you keep picking the same kind of person?" And you don't know how to explain that. You're not picking them. You're being pulled toward them by forces you can't fully see, by patterns established in your earliest relationships, by attachment styles formed when you were too young to choose them, by a nervous system that learned what love looks like in environments where love was conditional, unpredictable, or entangled with pain. And now, as an adult, your mind recognizes that particular flavor of dysfunction and calls it connection, not because you're broken, but because you're loyal. Loyal to the original template. Loyal to what your young mind learned love was supposed to feel like. And that loyalty, while it makes sense psychologically, keeps you trapped in cycles that damage you. Most people think attracting toxic relationships is about low self-esteem, or not knowing your worth. But people who live this pattern understand the truth. It's more complex than that. It's about what feels familiar, about what your nervous system recognizes as love even when your rational mind knows it's harmful. It's about repetition compulsion, the psychological phenomenon where we unconsciously recreate painful dynamics from our past, hoping this time the outcome will be different. This time will be enough. This time we'll earn the love that was always conditional. This time we'll fix what was broken, but we can't. Because we're trying to heal old wounds with new people who carry the same wounding capacity as the original. There is a magnetism in you toward what hurts. Not because you enjoy pain, but because pain is what you know. Your earliest experiences of connection, whether with caregivers who were inconsistent, critical, neglectful, or overwhelming, created a blueprint for what relationship feels like. And that blueprint didn't include stability, safety, or consistent care. It included anxiety, effort, performance, walking on eggshells, trying to earn love that should have been freely given. And so when you meet someone stable, someone healthy, someone who offers consistency and genuine care, something feels off. Your nervous system doesn't recognize it. It feels boring. It feels like something's missing. And what's missing is the familiar chaos, the familiar anxiety, the familiar need to prove yourself worthy of love. Without that, it doesn't feel like love at all. People who attract toxic relationships often carry an invisible curriculum. They know what it's like to feel intense chemistry with someone who's emotionally unavailable. They know how to rationalize red flags as complexity, as depth, as someone who's just misunderstood. They know what it's like to work harder for love than anyone should have to work. They know how to interpret hot and cold behavior as passion rather than manipulation. They know what it's like to feel responsible for someone else's emotional regulation. They know how to mistake anxiety for attraction, intensity for intimacy, possession for devotion. They develop a tolerance for dysfunction that others don't have. And this tolerance, formed through early adaptation, to difficult environments, makes them susceptible to people who would overwhelm someone with healthier boundaries. Research in attachment theory shows that people who experienced inconsistent caregiving, emotional neglect, or enmeshed relationships in childhood often develop anxious or disorganized attachment styles. These styles create specific patterns in adult relationships. Anxious attachment leads to hypervigilance about connection, fear of abandonment, and a tendency to pursue partners who are distant or unavailable. Disorganized attachment creates approach avoidance patterns where intimacy feels both desperately needed and terrifying. Both styles make individuals vulnerable to toxic partners who exploit these vulnerabilities, who use the push-pull dynamic to maintain control, who recognize someone who will tolerate instability because instability is what they know. There's a particular ache in people who attract toxic relationships, the ache of recognizing, often too late, that you've done it again, that the person you thought was different is actually the same, that the relationship you hoped would heal you is replicating your wounds. And with that recognition comes a crushing sense of self-blame. You knew better. You saw the signs. You had opportunities to leave earlier. Why didn't you? Why do you keep doing this to yourself? But self-blame misses the point. You're not consciously choosing toxicity. You're unconsciously drawn to what's familiar, and what's familiar was formed before you had the capacity to choose differently. What makes this particularly painful is that toxic people often present initially as exactly what you've been looking for. They're charming, attentive, intense. They move quickly. They make you feel special, chosen, understood. And for someone who grew up feeling unseen or unvalued, this attention feels intoxicating. It feels like finally being recognized. What you don't realize until later is that this intensity isn't love. It's love bombing. It's a manipulation tactic designed to create quick attachment. And by the time the mask slips, by the time the criticism starts, the control emerges, the emotional abuse begins. You're already invested, already attached, already believing that if you just try harder, the person you met at the beginning will come back. People who attract toxic relationships often have highly developed empathy. They can see potential in people. They can understand someone's pain, their trauma, their reasons for behaving badly. And this empathy, while beautiful, becomes a liability because they extend compassion to people who don't extend it back. They make excuses for behavior that shouldn't be excused. They believe in change that isn't happening. They stay in situations that are damaging them because they can see the wounded person underneath the toxic behavior. And they tell themselves that love means staying, that loyalty means accepting, that understanding means tolerating. But love without boundaries isn't love. It's self-abandonment. The pattern also involves a specific kind of hope. The hope that this time will be different, that this person with enough of your love, enough of your patience, enough of your sacrifice, will finally be able to love you the way you need to be loved. This hope is rooted in childhood experiences where love was conditional, where you learned that if you were good enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, maybe you could earn stable affection. And so you bring that same energy into adult relationships. You try to earn what should be freely given. You work to fix what isn't yours to fix. And you exhaust yourself in the process. What people don't understand about attracting toxic relationships is that it's not about attraction in the romantic sense. It's about recognition. Your nervous system recognizes certain emotional signatures. The unavailable parent becomes the unavailable partner. The critical caregiver becomes the critical lover. The unpredictable household becomes the unstable relationship. You're not attracted to toxicity. You're attracted to familiarity. And familiarity, for you, unfortunately includes dysfunction. Your system is trying to master the original trauma by recreating it, trying to get a different outcome this time, trying to prove that you can be loved by someone who operates the way your early attachment figures did. But you can't heal old wounds with new versions of the same pain. There's also a way that toxic relationships provide a strange comfort. They keep you in a role you know how to play. The fixer, the caretaker, the one who tries harder, the one who forgives endlessly, the one who accepts crumbs and calls it a meal. You've been playing this role since childhood. It's exhausting, but it's familiar. And stepping out of it, choosing a healthy relationship where you're actually valued and respected, requires becoming someone new, someone who believes they deserve more, someone who can tolerate being treated well. And that transformation is terrifying when your entire identity has been built around earning love you were never freely given. People who attract toxic relationships often struggle to identify them early. They've normalized so much dysfunction that they don't have accurate calibration for what's acceptable. Behaviors that would send others running. Jealousy, controlling behavior, emotional volatility. They interpret as passion or caring. Boundaries that others would enforce immediately. They negotiate away, telling themselves it's not that bad, that everyone has flaws, that they're being too sensitive. Their internal alarm system has been compromised by early experiences that taught them that love comes with pain, that care comes with conditions, that connection requires sacrifice of self. Sleep often becomes difficult in toxic relationships. You lie awake, analyzing conversations, trying to understand what you did wrong, rehearsing how you'll explain yourself, planning how to avoid the next conflict. Your nervous system is in constant activation. You're hypervigilant. 2 mood changes, 2 signs of anger or withdrawal. You've become a student of someone else's emotional landscape while neglecting your own. And the exhaustion isn't just from lack of sleep. It's from the constant emotional labor of maintaining a relationship that shouldn't require this much work. But here's something crucial that people who attract toxic relationships need to hear. This pattern isn't permanent. It's learned. And what's learned can be unlearned. But unlearning requires something difficult. It requires grieving. Grieving the childhood you needed but didn't get. Grieving the love you deserved but didn't receive. Grieving the fantasy that you can fix broken people with enough care. Grieving the belief that your worth is determined by your ability to earn someone's affection. And that grief is painful. It's why many people stay stuck. Because facing the grief feels more unbearable than staying in familiar dysfunction. The path forward starts with recognition. Not just recognizing toxic people, but recognizing your own patterns. Understanding what draws you to them. Identifying the familiar feeling that you've been mistaking for connection. Learning to distinguish between intensity and intimacy. Between anxiety and attraction. Between someone who's complex and someone who's unavailable. This requires developing what you may have never had. A secure internal sense of what healthy love actually looks like. Something shifts when people who attract toxic relationships begin to understand attachment, when they learn that their pull toward unavailable people isn't a character flaw but a psychological pattern. When they recognize that the anxiety they feel in relationships isn't love, it's activation of old attachment wounds. When they start to see that the people they're drawn to aren't uniquely terrible, they're just playing a role in a script written long before they arrived. And with this understanding comes the possibility of choice. Conscious choice, rather than unconscious compulsion. There's a profound moment that often comes in this process. The moment when you meet someone healthy and your system screams that something is wrong. That it's too easy, too stable, too boring. And instead of listening to that discomfort and leaving, you recognize it for what it is. Your nervous system being confused by something it doesn't recognize as love because it looks nothing like your original template. And you stay anyway. Not because it feels right yet, but because you're choosing differently. You're choosing based on how someone treats you rather than how familiar their dysfunction feels. People who work through this pattern often discover something liberating, that the intense chemistry they felt with toxic people wasn't special connection. It was trauma recognition. 2 nervous systems identifying familiar wounds in each other. And while that creates intensity, it doesn't create healthy love. Healthy love, they learn, feels different. It feels calmer. It feels safer. It feels like you can breathe. And while it might not create the same adrenaline rush as toxicity, it creates something better. It creates peace. It creates growth. It creates a foundation rather than a crisis. And maybe the most important truth of all is this: you are not destined to repeat these patterns forever. You are not fundamentally broken or damaged beyond repair. You learn to recognize toxicity as love because that's what you were taught. But you can learn something new. You can develop new patterns. You can heal your attachment wounds. You can build relationships that don't require you to abandon yourself. It won't happen overnight. It requires patience, awareness, often therapy, and the willingness to sit with the discomfort of choosing differently. But it's possible. You can become someone who recognizes healthy love when it arrives. Someone who can receive it. Someone who knows they deserve it. If you are someone who keeps finding yourself in toxic relationships, who looks back and sees a pattern you don't understand, who feels ashamed of choices you can't seem to stop making, then maybe it's time you hear this. You're not weak. You're not stupid. You're not choosing this consciously. You're responding to psychological programming established before you could consent to it. But you can reprogram. You can heal. You can learn what secure attachment feels like. You can choose partners who add to your life rather than deplete it. And you can do this not by changing who you are fundamentally, but by healing the parts of you that learned to call dysfunction love. Those parts deserve compassion. They were doing the best they could with what they knew, but they don't have to run your life anymore. You get to choose now, and that choice, difficult as it is your path to freedom.